right, welcome back everybody. We're gonna get started here. Hopefully people can see me and see my screen. And what we're gonna start with is Epicor functions in Kinetic. Woohoo! Meaning, how do I call these from the Kinetic UI? Because it's a little bit different than calling them from classic customizations. So what I'll do is I'll walk through some basics of functions. So we kind of get on the same page. We'll walk through creating a basic function, and then we'll walk through how to get that into the Kinetic UI. So what are functions or Epicor functions? They are server-side reusable code that can be used across customizations. They're accessible via REST. You can also make them not accessible via REST, and they're accessible via BPMs. So code where you might have had to replicate the code on BPMs between 2 or 3 BPMs to check for a condition or something. So you wrote the same code over and over. You can now have a function that does that. So if you've got an issue with the function, you just fix the function, all those BPMs would get that reusable code. So you don't have to remember to go into 3 different BPMs, fix the code up. You can just fix up your function. That's going to make it a lot easier to maintain. Functions are also accessible inside of Kinetic customizations or Kinetic configurations. So you can call these there. They can also be exposed via REST, meaning outside applications can call your functions and get information. So maybe you expose how to calculate a certain volume or a certain area for your product. You need that done a certain way. You can do that with a function, and then other people can actually call that function, get the same results. This is the direction where code's going from Epicor. So classic customizations, you were able to put in code behind the forms. Kinetic, you don't have that capability, but you do have the capability to call functions. So between the functions and the BPMs, that's where you're going to start putting your code for your what used to be customizations inside of Classic. That's where everything's going to exist going forward. Now, functions are grouped into libraries. So your library is kind of your unit of work. So you can have multiple functions inside of a library, and then that library you say is in production or it's not in production. If it's in production, then customizations, meaning screen customizations, can get to it. If it's not in production, then you can still get to it via the REST API to do testing. And I believe it has to be promoted as well for your BPMs to access it. But you can still test your functions even though they're not promoted. So this lets you kind of have a staging area, so to speak. Now, functions can call other functions in other libraries. You can't call a function within your own library. And you also can't have a circular reference, meaning function A calls function B, calls function C, which calls A again. That's not going to be allowed. So it has to be a chain. It can't be a circle. So just keep those things in mind when you're talking about functions here. All right, libraries. Like I said, they're used to group functions together, used to promote things, call your own things. I already covered all of that. Now the types of functions that we've got widgets, just like you had with BPMs. You can do things with just the widgets, which is pretty powerful. You can also do widgets including code, and then you've also got custom code. So in the cloud, I'm not sure if you've got exactly custom code in there or not. I'd have to look that up. The other thing about a function is it's going to have a signature, meaning what variables are passed in, what are their data types, and what are you sending back, and what's its data type. That means the signature of the function. And the reason you want that is so that you know what's coming in, and Epicor can say, hey, if you're not passing the right type, it's going to be a problem, and also that you're passing out the right type. Once you set that signature, you don't want to change it. Why? Because if somebody's already calling you, that's going to be a problem. You're changing your signature. Let's say you add another parameter or you change the output, then those other people are also going to have to update their usages of your function. So you want to make sure those are stable. Now, if it's just you calling your own stuff, sure, you can go ahead and change it, update all your code. But this is kind of a stopgap or a way to check to make sure you're not going to break anything is by doing that promotion and locking those signatures. Now, the signatures can be changed. You're just going to get a warning that says, hey, you're changing the signature. You're going to need to update anybody who's calling you. All right, so let's try and do a walkthrough of a function here. Now I got to bring up my Epicor functions. Where are you? There you are. sorry, have this sitting over here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new library to start with. So I'll just go new, add library. And Epicor functions, I'm sorry I didn't bring up the menu. You can just do a search for function. You'll find it in Epicor functions, not a big deal. So add a library. I'm going to name this emug 221109. I can put in a description, test functions for emug presentation. And then if I'm going to allow for custom code within my widgets, I would want to check that, or if I'm going to do custom code functions. Now you can also allow database access. So you can say whether you can read from the database or read and write to the database. Internal use only means that it's only used within BPMs and customizations. It's not going to be exposed via REST. So you can actually keep your functions from being called outside. If I need, I can come over and do references and have references to other assemblies. Tables, meaning I'm going to actually access the database. So if you're allowing that database access, you need to make sure you specify which tables you're going to allow access. Services, meaning the Epicor business objects as REST services. This is going to be your preferred way of interacting with Epicor. So you wouldn't be using an assembly from Epicor, you'd want to be using a service. And then other libraries. So if your functions are going to call other functions in other libraries, you would want to reference those other libraries as well. Security, you want to make sure that you move your company over. If you don't have your company in the authorized companies, it's not going to be allowed to call your library. So that's why you want to make sure you set that one up. Notes, over here, we've had several people ask, well, how do I know what's going on in a customization? Well, this is a place where you can add notes for your library. What did you add? What did you do? Here's the history of it. You can do those types of things with the notes. Now I'm going to go over to the function. I'm actually going to save. Provided original library is used with a different global ID. Are you telling me I already have an emug? Oops. Let's make sure I didn't use a library that I already had. No, I don't have that name. So it's probably because I just don't have a function in here. So 221109, record not found, add, yes. Emug presentation, we'll make it quick. So let's jump over to a function. We'll do a new widget function. Now, what we're going to do, it's a very simple function. I'm just going to add days to a date. So I'm going to accept in how many days are we adding and what's the date that we're starting with. So I'm going to say my function is add days to date. Adds days to a date. Nothing big here. So down here is where we do our signature. And this is where we can define our input and our output parameters. Your input are your request parameters. What are you sending into the function? Your response parameters, what's going out of the function. Now this can be a single value or it can be multiple values. You have that capability. So I'm going to say I'm going to take in days, and then I have to specify the type. And you do need to drop this down. I'm going to say that my days is going to be an integer or int32. I'm also going to take a current date as the name of my other guy here, and it's going to be a date time. There we go. And I'm going to have an output, and that's going to be a date time because I'm adding my days to a date time. So I'll set that properly. Once you've got your signature set up, click on your complete button here, and now it's kind of locked. If you go to edit it again, now granted I haven't saved anything, normally you would get a message saying, hey, you're modifying your signature. So because I haven't done anything, I'm pretty good here. Now I'm going to go into design mode, and this will look very familiar, just like BPMs. You've kind of got a little canvas with your widgets that you've got on here. Some of these will look very familiar if you've done BPMs. It's because they are the same widgets. So you can do a lot just by dragging the widgets on and doing anything that you need to do. So I can invoke BO methods, meaning I can invoke business objects. I can invoke another function. I can have conditions. I can notify, collaborate. I can raise exceptions, so messages, so on and so forth. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to set an argument variable. So I'm going to come over here, pull that out, and I'm going to connect my start to my argument variable here. Now, in my argument variable, specified argument, I'm going to click on that. And the argument I want to set is my output variable. So I'll just select that, click OK. You do have to make sure that you select the row. By default, it comes up, none of these are selected. The OK is grayed out, disabled. So make sure you click on the right row before you hit OK. Some people have expressed frustration with that, not knowing they actually have to select the row, make sure it turns blue. Now I'm just going to add my items or add my days to my date that I'm passed in. So I'm just going to say current date. I'll just double click that, moves it over. And then I'm going to do dot add interval, open parenthesis, days. Oops, I think that needs to be in lowercase, comma. I'm sorry. I need to select my days over here so that it gets capitalized correctly. And then interval unit dot days. So I know whether I'm doing hours, minutes, whatever, that's what the interval unit is, so that I can add different things. I'm going to hit my check syntax here. Syntax is okay. Ha-ha! We kind of wanted that. Click OK. Now, like I said, I'm not doing anything major with this one. I wanted to keep it simple so we could focus on how do I actually call this. You can do a lot more even with these widgets. So I'm not actually connecting to C# code yet. I'm not doing any custom code. Just taking advantage of the widgets, you can still do a lot with this. I'm going to save my function here, close out, and then save my library. Still getting that same issue. Okay, so we're going to call this a different thing, hopefully. Let me call this just FZ. See if it likes that. Or do you ever have one of those days where the world is against you? Let's close that, and I'll bring up my menu, go to functions here, join Epicor function maintenance. Let's try and do a new library again. We'll just give it 1109. Okay, it took that one. So let me just go in and do my function real quickly. Sorry about this. Adding a library. Let me make sure I get my function names correct here. Add days to date. I'm not going to worry about my description. We'll just put in test, go to signature. This will be days. It's an int 32. Welcome to doing live demos, right? This is going to be current date. It'll be a date time. There you are. And then I'm going to have an output, and it's going to be a date time. There we go. Complete my signature. Go back to design. Drag this over just a moment. We'll get that set argument variable. Connect my critters up here. Come in here, specified argument. Choose our output variable. Our expression is going to be current date dot add interval, open paren, our days, comma, interval unit. Helps if you spell interval correctly. Dot days, close paren, check syntax, make sure all's good. Add inter. It's really not my data type now that I'm thrown off, right? I'll hit OK. We'll save, close our designer, save our library. There we go. So I must have been testing with that same library name, or it's in a different company from a previous instance. So sorry about that. So now I've got my function. If I want to test my function, there's a good way to do that. You can actually go to your help screens in the Epicor API help, and your functions will be displayed there. So if you want an easy way to do that, I'm just going to go to the Epicor help, which is my server instance API/help. And you do have to log in. So that's going to come up. I'm going to go back, and then I can go to Epicor functions over here. Now, you do need to choose your company, and then only the items that have been promoted to production are going to appear here. Since we're in a staging environment, we haven't promoted our library, it's not going to appear in this list. This would be your library. You click on your library, then you can get to your functions. So if you haven't promoted, what you can do is use a tool called Postman. And I pulled up Postman over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my previous example here that I was using. And we're just going to take this guy, duplicate, and this is going to be our function called add days. And I'm just naming this inside of Postman. Okay, this doesn't really have to do with our function. The part that has to do with our function is up here. This is a variable for my app server, my instance, API v2, EFX for functions. Now, because I'm not in production, I have to put in staging. Then I've got my company and my library. Now I'm going to go back to my Epicor functions maintenance and make sure I grab my library name since I changed that on me. So I'm going to paste that into this URL. And then my function is called add days to date. Paste that in. So my URL is my server, instance, API v2, EFX, staging because I've not promoted my library, company, library, function name. Pretty easy to deal with. I'm going to go to my body. Now to pass those parameters into the function, you use a format that's called JSON. So I'm in a raw format, lets me type in the text exactly as I need it. And in this dropdown, I told it it's JSON type instead of being text or HTML, XML, so on. So in JSON, everything is surrounded in curly braces. Now my other function was called hours for a parameter. This one's called days. And let's say we're going to add 3 days to our date of 11/9/2022. Now I did put in a time here, doesn't have to be a time. When I send this, I should get an output 2 days later or 3 days later. So 11/9 becomes 11/12. If I want to go backwards, I can say -6. Send. That should take us back to 11/3. You can even go across months if you want to, -36. So I go backwards into October. So it's an easy way to test your function. Now, if your function was doing database updates, calling business objects or services to do any database updates, you should see those reflected in your database as well. So you can actually do everything straight from just simple Postman. Now, I want to use my function inside of an Epicor customization or an Epicor configuration. So I need to make sure I publish my function. So I'm going to go back to my Epicor functions maintenance. I'll go to actions, promote library to production. Now, when I do that, I'm going to move the selected library and its contents to public space. The library's functions will be available to external calls. Continue, yes. So now everything's kind of locked up. I can't go into design mode. I can't go and edit the signatures. That's because it's been promoted. I don't want to do changes when it's in production. If I demote it, I can go actions, demote library from production. Now I can edit it again. But remember, anything that you do for your editing, if you're changing the signature, changing function names, whatever, anything that's calling those functions has to get updated. So you want to be careful about doing that. Now that I've got my item in production, if I try to call the staging, I'll come back with a blank response. That's because it's no longer in a staging environment, it's now in production. So I can take this /staging out. Then when I hit send, you ever have one of those days where it's not gonna work correctly even when you try it? All right. Emug 11, add days to date. You should be in there. Oh, because I didn't include my API key. That's why I'm not getting this. So I would need to go to, I believe, my headers, my API key, and my API key is there. He should be working. For some reason, I'm not getting my value back. I'm gonna go ahead and move on simply because I don't want to run out of time showing you how to connect this up inside the Kinetic function. But he should be working that way. The kicker is to remember you need your API key here for your production as well. And if you're not familiar with API keys, there is information on that on the web. You can go to Epi users, and as well there's information when you go to Epicor REST inside of the CodaBears YouTube channel. You'll find information on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up part class maintenance, and we're going to do a customization on this. Now, granted, this is kind of a made up example, so bear with me. We're just showing an example of how to do the customization or the configuration so that we can call our function. Really, you'd want this on wherever you're actually going to do it. Now, I just brought up part class maintenance. Like you've seen everybody else do, we're going to go to that overflow menu, go to Application Studio. Now, when you come into Application Studio, you'll notice it says New Layer up here. If you ever need to bring up a layer and you don't know which layer it is, you can click this New Layer, and then you can say, I want to change layer, and it'll bring up your previous layers that you've got in here. So if there are multiple layers, this is how you can get back to a layer to edit it if you need to. Now I'm going to go back. I'm going to give my layer a name. I'm going to hopefully call it 1109. Let it go on any device, and this is my EMUG presentation. Now, as Calvin and Andy had said, you probably want this description to be exactly what you're doing. I'm just doing this inside of here for a moment. So I'm going to say save layer so that I've got that. Now up here, instead of saying new layer, I've got the name of my layer so I can tell where I'm at. Now I'm going to come up to this top node. I'm in the application map. Both of the previous presentations have said, hey, here's the application map. So this kind of tells you where your screens are. So when I first come into part class maintenance and I get that grid, that's this screen. When you actually go to edit your details, that's this detail screen down here. So this application map kind of tells you how the application flows from screen to screen. Now I'm going to come up to my top node up here, edit part class maintenance, and I'm going to add a button over here that's going to pop out a side panel, and then in that side panel we'll pass parameters to our function and get our value back. So I'm just doing this to illustrate how we can do this, all right? So I'm going to add my button. Now button's right here, but as you've seen in the others, you can start typing into the search, and that limits down what you've got for your components. That's going to make it really nice because there are a lot of components that you can put onto a form. So if you can remember the names, great. You can use the search, quickly get to the item. If you don't remember the name, you can still scroll through the list. So I'm going to grab my button, drop it on here, and you'll see just like others have shown you, you can drag, drop them, and it'll kind of snap it to where you're going to go so that you know that you're putting it in a correct spot. So I've got my button on here. Now I'm going to go to the properties. I'm going to click on my button because I don't think it grabbed my properties. There we go. So it's an ERP button. Great. My basic, my ID. Well, the ID is important because when you start wiring events to your buttons, you need to know the ID of the button so that you can wire things in properly. So that's why, as Andy had said, you want to set your IDs to something so that you know what they are. Now he was using UD to say it's a user defined button. I'm just going to go ahead and call mine call add days because that's what I'm going to do. This button is going to call my add days method. My label, this is what's going to appear on my button. So we'll just call this call add days, just like that. So that changes the text on my button. If I go under advanced, I can choose my button style. Currently it's set to primary, which makes it dark blue. I can also set it to be outline or secondary or toggle. I'm going to set it to be outline. So it makes it an outline button with a white. So your primary buttons are the things that you can click to do like your save, your cancel, those types of things, your primary functions. Since this isn't a primary function, I'm going to make it an outline button so that people don't think, oh, this is an immediate function I can do. Now I'm going to save my changes here. And you'll notice when you save, you get that little progress bar up on the top. You do want to make sure you wait for that to complete. Anytime you see that little kind of barbershop pole going on the top, the little stripes that are rotating, you want to let that finish because it's doing some work in the background. Often you'll see that when it's loading a grid or loading a BAQ or something. Make sure you let that finish. Otherwise you'll be thinking, hey, there's no results. You just need to wait for the process to finish. So now I want to go back to my application map, and I'm going to create a new page. So I'll click new, and you'll notice, hey, it created this page right underneath class or part class maintenance. So there might be a different way to get to this page just off of part class maintenance. We're going to turn this into our slider panel. Now I'm going to click on my page here and click edit. And I think I actually clicked too early. So I'm going to close my page edit here. I actually want to go back to my application map, click on my page here. I'm going to change my name of my page before I start editing the contents of the page. So we're going to call this function test. My caption down here, make sure I clicked in it, there we go. We're going to say is function test. Now when I tab out of that, you'll notice now I've got a definition over here. My page type currently is page. I want this to be a slide out panel. So I'm going to come down to my page type, make it a slide out panel, boom. Now it automatically drops it over here. So kind of your application map is getting updated as you go through the different steps for creating this new page. So now that I've got my page title, you want to have your name and your caption and your type set before you go to edit the page. To edit the page, you just come up to here and you'll see there's a little pencil type of icon. That's your edit. If you want to delete it, just like Andy had shown you, you'll hit the trash icon and that will delete things. I'm going to go ahead and click the edit. And so I've got a blank page up here. Now, I'm going to need a couple text boxes, well, actually a numeric box and a date picker so that I can say how many days am I adding and what's the current date that we're going to pass in. I'm going to add a button to actually call my function, and then I'm going to have another date picker to display the output from my function. Now I could have used a label and formatted it up. I just think the date picker is going to be easier to work with. So I'm just going to grab my items on here. I'm going to grab a numeric box, drop him on there. Oops, I forgot. I need a container, I believe. Nope. I need a panel. This is what happens when you get thrown off, right? So we're going to add a panel. Then I believe I can add my numeric box to my panel. And this is what happens when you get all sorts of confused, right? It won't let me do the one column. And it wouldn't let me do my container, would it? You're not going to let me draw my container. No. What am I doing wrong? Give me just a second to look at my options here to make sure I gift you the right thing, because I'm having, in case I did my properties. Slide out type, yes, you're right. Don't believe I need a flex layout. Let's save our changes. Maybe it's just not liking me because I didn't save changes in here. Oh, come on. Okay, you're not letting me do a container. You're not letting me do that. And you're not going to let me group box. That's what I missed. So I'm going to drop my group box on here for my slide out panel. Sorry, didn't have that properly in my notes. My bad. Now let's get our numeric editor on here. So I'll get my numeric box. Now he's all happy. And I'm going to get my date picker. So we'll drop a date picker below numeric box. Well, today it would be below, but there we go. I'll get my button. But I want my button down below. Come on, guys.
Use the arrows to move it up and down. Select the object and then the up and down arrow under function test. There
we go. Normally I can drag and drop, but not today. It's just going to be a day for me. So we'll use that second date pickers right here. We'll drop him below our button. This one's going to be our output. Thanks for the help, Kelvin. So I'm going to go back to my numeric box. I'm going to go to my properties. Oops. I thought I'd go to my numeric box and go to my properties. Okay. You ever have one of those days where you now can't get to your properties? Oh, okay.
Click on the object, then the Properties tab.
Click on the object, click on Properties. For some reason, it is not letting me get my properties back.
Save, close, go back in.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. So give me just a second, close out of there. Let me get my Epicor main screen back up, get into part class maintenance. We'll bring that back over. Overflow menu, go to Application Studio. We'll go to New Layer, Change Layer, pull up our emug, edit, go to our function test, edit that, click on our box, go to Properties, there we go. So it just lost its head for a little bit. And like Calvin had said before, sometimes when you have too many items up here, that can happen. Just close out, come back in, and you should be okay. So now, assuming I can find my spot, my item here, I'm going to change my label for my days to be days. I'm going to set this to be my days for my ID on my box. My binding, this is what gets to be fun. So I'm going to come down to, I lost my spot here. I need my data, my epi binding. So this text box isn't going to be bound to anything in the database, right? But I still want to be able to have my user type into it and pass that over to my function. So I still have to bind it to something. So what you can do is you can actually bind it to a view and then just make up a field for it. So for example, part class is one of the views that I've got. So I'm going to choose part class dot, and then I'm just going to type in a bogus name, fxn days, where fxn stands for function. I'm going to come down to advanced, and for my format, I can set a min and max. So I can say my min is 0, and then my format, I can say my minimum integer digits is 0, my minimum fraction digits is 0, and my maximum fraction digits is 0. Now, why I've got decimals for fractions of a digit, kind of interesting, but hey, it works. So now we'll go back to our epi text box. So we should be happy recording integers, and you'll notice our default value here went from 0.00 to just 0. So I'm going to go down to my date picker, and we're going to set its ID to be the current date. I'm going to set my label to just be current date. We're going to set a binding on this. Again, it's just going to be a bogus binding. So I'll start typing part, choose part class, dot, and again, I'm going to say with that same naming convention, I'll do fxn to represent that it's a function value, current date. For my button, I'm going to click on my button. We're going to call it call function, call fxn. For its label, we'll just say call function. That just changes the text on our button here. And our last date picker, we're going to say is our new date. And I'll set its label to be new date. And its binding, again, we need to bind our output of our function to a view. So again, we'll say part class dot new date. Now I probably should have said fxn new date, but I'm going to leave it like this. Now, since this is my output value, I'm going to come down to my state and set this to be read-only so that my user can't change this. So they can change these two, click the call function, and then it will output this. Now, this would also be another place where I could have used a label, like Matt had asked, when would I want to use a label? This would be an option where I could have done that. But so that I get the formatting, that's why I picked the date picker so that I don't have to deal with that. Now I'm going to save my changes here just in case. Now, I need a new event that's going to trigger pulling out this slider panel. And I also need an event that's going to call my function when this button is clicked. So we're going to add in 2 events here. So I'll come over to the events, and then I need to add a new event. So I'll click add new. And my first event You actually have to click up here in this title up here. I thought, there's my event ID. Okay, we're going to call this function test form. Now Epicor kind of says, hey, if you're going to pop out a form, have it end in form. If you're going to be doing something else, name it the appropriate thing. So since this is popping out a form, I'm going to call it a form. I'll then go to my trigger, and my trigger type is going to be on a control. The hook is going to be on click, and my target is going to be my call add days. So I'm targeting that panel. Okay. I'm going to come over to my toolbox and look for a slider. And I can say, hey, I want to do a slider open. Click on my slider, go to properties, go to my parameters, and the page that I want is going to be that function test that we did. So that page is called function test, and that's the page that'll open up. Now, if you forget your ID, come back over to your page. My caption is function space test, so I think I need to actually have the space in there. So I'm going to come back over my parameters, put my space in, because otherwise I think I'll end up with a problem. I'm going to save my changes here, and then I'll do another event. So I'll go over to events, click new, I get my new event here. And if I click in my event, go to properties, there we go. I want to call this event call function click. Okay. For its trigger, again, we're going to be triggered off of a button, which is a control. So I'll say, hey, I'm going to be triggered off of a control. The hook is going to be on click, and my target is call function. Now I can go over to my toolbox, and I'm going to drop in a function. Now they're called ERP-function, but I believe if you start typing function, you'll see that it's there as well. So I'm just going to drag an ERP function, click on my function, go to my properties. Now you'll notice I need an API key. Now, again, like I said, API keys we cover in a different, some different videos. You can find information on them all over the place, but I just defined an API key so that I can use it with this function. You do have to have that in your customization. Keep in mind that when you call an API key, it sticks with the environment. So if I create an API key in my pilot environment, I can't export that API key and move it up to prod. So if I'm testing with things in pilot and I create a solution and then push them up to prod, I'm going to need to go into those configurations and set the API key that's in prod. If I copy prod to pilot, my API keys will come down. So when you grab the database, you've got them, but when you push up, you're not going to have them with you. So you might need to do some changes. What library do I want to call? Well, I'm going to call my library that did not get moved to production. Okay, so let me save this. Why did my library not get promoted? Let's go over to our function maintenance. And again, maybe I've just got things a little out of whack here. So we'll search. I'm going to go to my ebug 1109 and hit OK. Actions. He is promoted. Okay. So give me just a second, because since that does not appear in my list, I'm going to actually exit out of Epicor completely and restart my Epicor, because I think it has a little bit of a hiccup in it. And I know it's starting on another screen. As soon as it gets up here, I'll get things over onto the demo screen for you. Pierre asked, is there a way to change all API keys to use in prod? There is not. Once you create an API key, it's in that database, and the only time you can see that API key is when you're creating it. After that, you can make changes to what the API key's access scope is, but you'll never see that key again. So you want to make sure that you got that key when you create it. And Mike's asking, did I assign a company? Well, let's just make sure on my library that I assigned a company. I thought I had, but you know what? I did not. Thank you, Mike. You just saved me a heck of a problem. I would have been spinning my wheels for a while. Okay, so let me get back into part class maintenance, because that's probably what the problem was, is my library didn't have a company assigned to it. So let's get back into Application Studio. I'll go click on the new layer so that I can load my other layer in. I'll click Change, click Edit on my emug 1109, go to my function. Oops, I wanted to go to my events, and then I believe I need to go to my control events, and we were on control function click, if I remember correctly. And of course, other windows popped up and covered up my notes, so give me a second to bring those back up. There we go. So I've got my ERP function. Let's bring up our library. Hey, there we go. Thank you very much, sir. That was a great help. Now, the service operation is going to be the function that you're calling. In my case, I only have one function listed. Pretty easy to do. Then I can go to my method parameters. And you do have to click the plus to add them in. I know it looks weird. It doesn't look like things are changing, but that's how you would add in parameters. Now, it did pick up my parameters from my function. If you needed extra ones, that's how you go through and do them. Just wanted to illustrate that for you. So I'm going to go to my days. Now, my field data type is an integer, and then my I need to type in my value, which is going to be for my binding. And this was part class. So I'll select that, dot fxn days. Then I'll go to my current date. And that is going to be, why does that say my field type is string? Now I'm a little paranoid about my function. Did I not have my signature correct? No, it is a date time. Okay, it's recognizing it as a string. I'm not going to panic. So my field value for my date time is going to be my part class dot fxn current date. So when you do these bogus fields on the view, you're going to have to remember what you typed. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to my properties on my function. I'm going to do a behavior on success. And I want this to do a row update. So I'll click on that. So if my function's successful, I'm going to do a row update. I'll click on my row update, go to parameters. And because I don't have any parameters on this, that's where I have to click my plus, click on my columns. My epi binding is going to be my part class. Did I not click plus? There we go. You have to make sure you get this number up here to tell it which parameter number you're on. And sometimes that takes 2 clicks of the plus, sometimes it takes 1. As you've seen, I got a little screwed up there. So we'll call this part class again, whoops. Select that, dot, and I believed I called this new date, didn't I? So then we should be good. I'm not going to do anything with the expression. My value, I need to actually edit the value so that I can pull the value from that function. And this is going to be quote, curly brace, action result with a lower a, upper R, dot output, which is my parameter that's coming out, is the output. Click save, and then that guy should be good. Now I'm going to click save on my customization, and then I can hit preview. So now I've got my part class up. I'm going to let it spin. Now I've got my grid. Again, wait for that little barbershop spinner up there to finish. Click my call add days. And it should have popped out my slider. Okay. Having one of those days where my demo is going a little sideways, I'm going to go ahead and close this guy. And let's see if we can find it real quick. I'll give it just a little bit of a function test form, call function, and I want my application map. I did call you function test, so I think I screwed that up. when I said it needs to be, oh, you are call function because we're selecting you from a drop down. So I'm not going to worry about you. Why is my slide out not going? So let's go back to events, function test form, call add days. Target is call function. All right, we're gonna click my call add days again. He's not happy. So I'm going to back out and do my Betty Crocker thing and go change layer and go to my test layer here, which luckily I had made up before. And this one was designed around a calling add hours instead of calling add days. So this is what should be happening is I click the button and I get my slide out. Now, like I said, this is hours instead of days. So I'm going to put in, I have to actually click my call function here, and then I can put in 48 hours. Let's put in a day of 11/9/2022, call my function, and it adds in those 48. Well, apparently I did 48 days instead of 48 hours. Even I didn't change my label up here. So my label says hours, but it's actually calling days in that function. So that's what should be happening. My slide out is what I'm missing on my other item. And I'm going to close my preview here. I'm going to give it one more shot before I skin my nose completely and go, you know what, I screwed this up somewhere. So I believe you are completely correct. You're a sliding panel, yes. My event, I wanted to go to part class maintenance. Let's make sure my button was wired in correctly. You were my call add days. So you should be doing a click event. So control, do I not have my call add days? Looks like I may have missed that. So let's try and add that is our function test form. Our control is our call add days. We're looking at his click, which should be fine. And this is what got hosed up. So it ended up doing a drop there. I apparently, when I slipped around, did not get my slider open back on my click event here. So now I've got my slider open, properties, and I believe I need to go to the parameters. My page is my function test. Oops. You want to be careful about the case. Function test. Let's save this guy. You did save. There we go. I saw the barbershop poll. We'll pull this up. We'll wait for the barbershop to finish scrolling there. Call add days. There we go. Now I do have to hit call function. Let's add 5 days to 10/31. Whoops. 10/31/2022 call function. So 11/5. If I want to make that 15/5 call function, 11/15. So the tricks here are getting those epi bindings. So if you actually have a value that you want to call from your function that's already on a data view, use a real binding. If you're looking to prompt the user like I was doing, then you need to use a fake binding and then just tie things back. Now you can use that row update to actually update values back into your data views, and you could call a save as well. So you can actually get the values updated back into the database as well. Okay, Pierre, sorry.
In the hopper.
Yep, when you transfer prod from dev, you mentioned I had to go everywhere to change the, is there a tool that will allow you to change all at once to the prod API key? Not that I'm aware of, Pierre. So I think you actually have to do that one by one. What would make more sense to me, or the easiest way to work around that, would be to take a copy of your production, create the key in production, copy that database, move it over to your dev environment. Now you've got the key. And so when you're doing your coding with your Kinetic customization, you can use that key, and that key is going to be the same in prod as it is in dev now. So then you don't have to change anything. If you're only doing one customization or one function like this, not such a big deal. But if you're using that same API key on a lot of places, that's probably a better way to do that. Looks like you got it. Thanks, Pierre. Okay, I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint here because I think I've got one other slide. Okay, couple tips. When you export your functions, you can export them as either a binary or a JSON format. Binary means it's going to be just ones and zeros, okay? Very hard to figure out. JSON format is going to be text, just like when I showed calling the function with parameters inside of Postman. It's the same style of text that we've got. So that JSON format is going to be good for source control so that you can actually source control your functions if you need to. And that'll let you view the history as you do changes. So it's a good way to do that. The customizations or the configurations, your Kinetic screens that you modify, those I did not find, at least in the 2022.1 version that I've got, I did not find a way to export those like you used to be able to export your classic customizations, where you could just say actions export or file export, depending, I forget which one it is, but it would then create a file, and then you could go over to another environment and import those. Instead, how to move those from environment to environment, you'll create a solution for those layers. And then that solution, you'd also want to create your, you'd want to include your menu, because the menu tells you what layers you're combining together. So that's why they did that with solutions instead of just being able to export a single layer and import it back in. You're going to do that with solutions. When you go to test, make sure that you know whether you're using a promoted library, in which case you're not going to have this staging inside of the URL. Otherwise, the URLs are identical. It's just the staging that's different. When a library hasn't been promoted, any company can actually get to it. So you can actually put in different company IDs in here and get to the information that way. So just be aware, once it's in prod, only those specific companies, thank you, Mike, can get to the item. So make sure that you choose that wisely, especially when you're trying to do a demo very quickly because something else went wrong. Help, you can get to the help, again, server instance API help v2. That gets you that version where you can actually do the menu search just like you can inside of Epicor. I kind of like that one better because I can just start typing things, find them easy. If you're used to the version 1 type of help, then that is still available. Again, server instance API help. So you can get there that way as well. The V2 on the help doesn't mean you're only getting to the version 2 of the API help. It just means you're getting to version 2 of the help for the API. So it's just a prettier format. I think it's works a lot better. I already covered solution workbench. I do suggest that you review your API keys and your access scopes regularly. Does that mean weekly? No. Does it mean once a year or something like that? Yes. Make sure that your API keys are still in use. If they're not being used, get rid of them. Why? Because they're a potential security risk. Somebody else could have that API key. If you're not sure what it's being used for, why are you letting somebody use it? So get that out of there. Also look at your access scopes, because if your access scopes have changed, maybe you've got different policies or procedures in place where you need to limit things. That's what those access scopes are good for. So make sure you keep those up to date based on your current policies and procedures. Where can I get more? Or where can I get more help to learn how to do these things? Actually, the Epicor help file on Application Studio is surprisingly good. It's well thought out. There are a couple typos depending on the version that you're in. So there were a couple things when I was looking at the 2022.1 help file. Things were a little bit different. Like they said, the preview, whether you click the X or whether you click close next to the preview. I think the old text for closing next to the preview was what was shown in the help file. That's not that much of a difference. You can easily look at it and go, oh, okay, that's not there. I click this button. So don't let those little things throw you. They're just little small things that are a little bit different between the versions, but the actual content of the help is still very good. and the walkthroughs are really good for how do I create and use these things. If you get stuck, need help, guess what? epiusers.help. I should have also put on here the Epicor user group.help. So I'll have to look up that URL. I'll add it into here. The National EUG also has forums that you can post questions on, but a lot of times you get faster answers on epiusers.help. So take advantage of that. There's a lot of people on there, a lot of good people that are looking at leading edge or bleeding edge of the technologies and Epicor. So they've been out there and using this for a while. Of course, CodaBears YouTube channel, youtube.com/@CodaBears. It's going to get to our library of help videos. We've got some out there for doing REST API as well as the API keys, access scopes, things like that. And then we're also developing some classes on functions and kinetic configurations or kinetic customizations. Hopefully have those ready for spring of 2023 so that you can sign up for them.
Also, if you missed a past user group meeting or something, all of the sessions that we've been doing should be up on the YouTube channel for anybody to access.
Correct. So anything that we've been doing these videos for, I guess this is our third year because we started when COVID made us not do in-person meetings. So all of those past meetings are up on the CodaBears YouTube as well. There will be playlists for the different eMug user groups that have been out there. So you can just look for the playlists and find everything that you're looking for the past meetings. Thanks, Kelvin. Any other questions? I actually made it through in time, even with the flub ups there.
You know, and you never did the conjunction junction.
No. I should have made my functions named and or. Would have been real confusing.